Hey everybody, John Lorden here. Welcome to another episode of Itchy Mysteries. And today we have one that is actually originally an HBO documentary. I've seen a lot of good products come out of HBO in terms of documentaries in this area. So I had pretty high hopes for this one. Did it meet up to them or not? We're going to chat about it. The movie we're talking about today is The Cheshire Murders. Hope I'm saying that right. I always want to say Cheshire. I think that's a bit too UK for how it's actually pronounced over here in the US. But let's start with the plot synopsis from IMDB. In the quiet suburb of Cheshire, Connecticut, Jennifer Pettit and her two young daughters were killed in a horrific home invasion. Husband and father William Pettit was the only one who escaped alive. This gripping film explores the events of that shocking triple homicide that rocked the town and set off a politically charged death penalty trial. The result is a disturbing revelation of police failures and untold personal dramas that point out the biggest tragedy of all: the crime could have been prevented at many turns. And that synopsis kind of wraps it up in a nice little nutshell. But one of the main issues that I had while I was watching this was I didn't know what it was actually about. I mean, yes, it's about a particular crime, but I mean, in terms of the theme that was being presented to me or any kind of message that was being presented to me, I didn't know what it was trying to tell me. And that is probably its weakest, and depending on how you look at it, could be its greatest strength. I frequently talk on this show about a few different types of documentaries that are out there. Documentaries where the director or the writer and director are really trying to get you to believe a particular thing. Sometimes those work well. Sometimes I don't like those because the message is too strong, or I don't agree with it for some reason, something along those lines. Then there's another type of documentary that tries to tread the middle of the road, but still about a particular topic, but really trying to show both sides and giving a bit of an unbiased view of that topic. This one doesn't quite fit into either of those. It's a different type of documentary. I would almost call this a slice of life true crime documentary. There seems to be different sections in this film that are addressing different things. So it feels like your focus is kind of being pulled all over the place. And like I said, that could be a good thing or a bad thing depending on how you look at it. There is the horror of what goes on in that home, of course. In terms of it being an itchy mystery, it's not quite a mystery because who does this horrific act is found out very quickly. The guys are captured basically fleeing the scene. So it's not about that. Then I was watching it and I was saying, well, maybe it's more about why this happened. And that is certainly one of the questions that doesn't get answered until much later in the film. But it's not really about that either. Then I was watching it and I was thinking, oh, it is trying to show me how this type of violence affects not only the families of the victims and their friends, but the families and friends of the perpetrators as well, which I thought was probably the part of the film that I appreciated the most. There was a lot of heart in hearing the stories of all these accounts from friends and family members on both sides of this horrific act. But then it slips into this other thing later in the film where it seems like it's going to be about the death penalty. And then there's even a little section where it seems like it's going to be about possibly blaming the police officers for not responding appropriately. It's strange because there's a lot to cover in this case, obviously, but I kind of wish, for me personally, that the filmmakers would have picked one or two of those particular themes and really stuck with it. And there's 2 directors credited for this film. It feels like there's 5. It feels like there is so many different points of view coming at you that you're not really sure what this film is exactly about, except that it's all wrapped in this one horrific event, but there's a lot of different themes that are being discussed in that one event. Like I said, for some people, you might really enjoy that, if you do enjoy that type of slice of life filmmaking mentality that I'm talking about. For me, it was just a little rough to transition from kind of one topic to the next, and also because the topics they didn't dive into them very deeply. It's kind of a light touch on could the cops have done more. It's kind of a light touch on the death penalty conversation. It's not really in depth. It's not really giving you a whole lot of deep questions about these things, just more of kind of an overall philosophical type questioning of these things, which I think there's films that actually ask those questions a bit stronger, and they present information in a much better way to give you much more to ponder than this film does. Ultimately, you wind up seeing some people go through a lot of tragedy. It's a little bit of a tough watch. Because of the transitions and the themes that I'm talking about, there's certain times where you're watching it and you kind of feel lost. At least I did. I was just kind of like, what am I watching here? What is this about? But by the time I got to the end of it, I was certainly happy that I had watched it, if nothing else than for the human aspects that were brought up in it. Meeting these other family members, hearing what they were going through in terms of dealing with this, seeing film of how they were dealing with this, getting to the trial, seeing how that went, hearing how the public was responding. In a strange way, it doesn't feel like a documentary. It feels like a nightly news segment that goes on for 2 hours. Which, I do appreciate an unbiased point of view, but when the topic is changing on you so much, being unbiased kind of gets lost because you're not really sure what the conversation is about anymore. But it really did feel like that. It felt like a nightly news segment, not even a news magazine segment. It wasn't even that strong in terms of narrative. It was like a long nightly news segment just about this particular case and all the things that were going on in this case. But of course, it was covering, a time span of years instead of just, a nightly news segment is usually talking about one thing. But, I looked into the director's backgrounds a little bit, didn't see any work that I had recognized or anything like that. And I don't know, guys. I didn't love it. The highlight in it for me is, like I mentioned, the humanity. Outside of that, I didn't know about this topic, so just getting to understand what this story is about, getting to hear what happened in this horrible tragedy. I appreciate getting the education of that. But it's not a movie that I would watch again. Is it something that I would suggest? Only if you're curious about this particular case, only if you want a extremely light touch on the ups and downs of capital punishment. The topic in terms of the cops and were they helpful or not, there's just not enough information here for that to really have been a good part of this feature. Unfortunately, I think it was a really great question, and they raise 2 or 3 points where you're like, I wonder if the police could have done more here. But like I said, they don't really dive into it. In terms of cinematography, nothing real special going on here except that, it's a beautiful house. There's beautiful homes in the area. So there's a little bit of scenery that you get in some of the shots. But other than that, it's really a lot of interview footage, a little bit of news footage, not a whole lot of courtroom footage, but outside of the courthouse footage. And in terms of music, I can't even remember if there is music in this. So that's usually a good thing because it usually means I haven't been pulled out of the story. So if there was music, I would say it's appropriate. But ultimately, I left this feeling like on my scale from 1 to 10, it was probably a 6. I really, even when I hit a movie where I'm not sure about if everyone of you out there is going to like it, I can usually at least kind of tell what type of people might like it. For this one, I really struggle. Best thing I can say is slice of life. That if you just like those films where there's kind of dialogue going on, but not necessarily a strong narrative, not necessarily a strong message that's being conveyed to you, you might enjoy watching this and going through it and seeing what happens in this case, and then having a few very light questions dropped in your lap towards the end of the film. But for me personally, and maybe this is just because of the work I do where I'm looking into cases, on a day-to-day basis, those dark, deep questions just weren't in this piece for me, and I kind of wanted them to be there. I wanted there to be a little bit more for me to grapple with at the end of this story, especially because it was such a horrific event that happened. And I'm not going to blow it by telling you the question of why, but I was pretty surprised to see how this whole thing kind of came together. So if anything, that is the one very small, what I would consider an itchy mystery in this piece. And if you want the answer to that, well, you're going to have to check it out. You can find it on Amazon here in the US. It is available for purchase only, $9.99 for both standard or high definition versions. I did hear from a little birdie that there's a version on YouTube. If you want to seek that out, I will let you do that for yourself. If you have an HBO subscription, I believe you can also check it out on that. Thank you so much for joining me on today's episode of Itchy Mysteries. I appreciate each and every one of you out there. Hope you're having a nice week, and I'll see you back here on the channel tomorrow. Take care.